The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, embossed lettering announcing Richard Dawson's upcoming wedding to his third wife. My hands trembled slightly as I read the details, knowing this meant facing a man who had made it crystal clear that I wasn't worthy of his son Daniel. The morning sun filtered through our kitchen window as I showed Daniel the invitation, watching his jaw tighten with familiar tension. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Daniel said quietly. But we both knew that wasn't really an option. Family obligations run deeper than personal comfort, especially when you're trying to build a life with someone whose father controls half the real estate in South Florida. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in our bedroom mirror, adjusting a navy dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Daniel was pulling a double shift at the fire station, which meant I'd be facing his father's wedding celebration alone. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who thought I was beneath his family had specifically requested my presence while his own son couldn't attend. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard's assistant. "Car arrives at 7 sharp. Mr. Dawson expects punctuality." No, please, no thank you. Just the kind of cold efficiency that wealthy men use to remind everyone else of their place in the hierarchy. I slipped on pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, the only jewelry I owned that felt appropriate for this world I'd never quite fit into. The black sedan pulled up exactly on time, windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors reflecting my own nervous face back at me. The driver, a man in his 50s wearing a pressed uniform, opened the door without making eye contact. "Ma'am," he said with professional courtesy that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. "Thank you," I replied, sliding into leather seats that probably cost more than my car. The interior smelled of expensive cologne and fresh flowers, a stark contrast to the modest apartment Daniel and I shared near the beach. As we drove through neighborhoods where the houses grew larger and the lawns more manicured, I tried to steady my breathing and prepare for whatever version of Richard Dawson would greet me. The wedding had been a spectacle of wealth and status, held at one of those historic mansions that rich families rent to prove their sophistication. I'd watched from the back row as Richard, silver-haired and commanding even at 78, exchanged vows with Denise, a woman 20 years his junior who wore diamonds like armor. The reception that followed was equally grand, with champagne that sparkled like liquid gold, and conversations that revolved around stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Throughout the evening, Richard had been polite but distant, acknowledging my presence with the same enthusiasm he might show a piece of furniture. When he announced that several wedding guests would be joining him for a weekend trip to his property in the Keys, I assumed I'd be conveniently excluded. Instead, his assistant approached me near midnight with instructions to be ready for departure at 8 in the morning. "Mr. Dawson specifically requested your attendance," she said, though her tone suggested this was as much a surprise to her as it was to me. "The flight will depart from Palm Beach International, private terminal. Don't be late." Now, sitting in the back of this sedan as we approached the airport, I wondered what game Richard was playing. He'd never shown interest in spending time with me before, had never made any effort to include me in family gatherings or business discussions. Daniel often joked that his father treated me like an inconvenient obstacle between him and his vision of his son's future. The private aviation terminal looked like something from a magazine, all glass and steel with perfectly landscaped gardens leading to the entrance. Inside, wealthy travelers moved with the casual confidence of people accustomed to having their every need anticipated. I checked in at a desk where the attendant's smile was professionally warm but impersonal, then settled into a leather chair to wait. Richard arrived precisely on time, of course, striding through the terminal with the kind of presence that made other people step aside instinctively. He wore a linen suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Behind him walked Denise and her daughter Ashley, both dressed like they were heading to a photo shoot rather than a casual weekend getaway. "Punctual," Richard said when he spotted me, though it sounded more like an observation than praise. Good, I despised tardiness. He didn't offer any other greeting, no explanation for why I'd been included in this trip, no attempt at small talk. Instead, he immediately began issuing instructions to the terminal staff about luggage and departure procedures. Ashley, Denise's daughter from her previous marriage, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. She was 26, blonde, and possessed the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never being told no. "Cute dress," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Very department store chic." I'd learned long ago that responding to subtle insults only escalates them, so I simply smiled and said, "Thank you." Sometimes the best defense is refusing to play the game at all. The jet waiting on the tarmac was magnificent, gleaming white with gold accents that caught the morning sun like jewelry. It was the kind of aircraft that screamed wealth and power, designed not just for transportation but for making a statement about the importance of its passengers. As we approached, ground crew members bustled around performing final checks, their movements precise and professional. "First time on a private jet?" Ashley asked with mock concern as we climbed the stairs. "The altitude can be overwhelming for some people. Try not to embarrass yourself." Richard had already disappeared into the cabin, leaving me to navigate these social landmines alone. The interior was stunning, with cream leather seats that looked like they'd never been sat in, and polished wood accents that gleamed under soft lighting. Everything was designed to impress, to remind passengers that they were experiencing luxury most people could only dream of. I chose a seat near the back, hoping to make myself invisible for the duration of the flight. Richard settled into what was clearly his preferred spot near the front, immediately pulling out his phone to make calls about business deals and property acquisitions. His voice carried through the cabin as he spoke to lawyers and accountants, each conversation reinforcing his image as a man who controlled significant wealth and influence. Denise and Ashley claimed seats in the middle section, their conversation revolving around shopping plans and spa appointments once we reached our destination. They spoke with the casual entitlement of people who had never worried about money, never calculated the cost of their desires against their bank account balance. As the engine spooled up and we prepared for takeoff, I found myself wondering why I was here. Richard had made it clear over the past 2 years that he didn't approve of my relationship with his son. He'd never been openly hostile, but his disapproval radiated from him like heat from asphalt on a summer day. Every interaction felt like a test I was destined to fail, every conversation a reminder that I didn't belong in his world. The jet lifted off smoothly, climbing into blue skies dotted with white clouds that looked like cotton balls scattered across fabric. Below, the Florida coastline stretched out in shades of green and gold, beautiful but somehow remote from this altitude. I pressed my face to the small window, watching the world shrink beneath us, and tried to prepare myself for whatever this weekend would bring. 20 minutes into the flight, Richard set down his phone and turned his attention to me for the first time since boarding. His gray eyes studied me with the intensity of a businessman, evaluating a potential acquisition, calculating value, and finding the assessment lacking. "You know," he said, his voice carrying easily across the cabin despite the engine noise, "I've been thinking about your situation with my son." The way he said situation made it sound like a problem that needed solving. Denise looked up from her magazine, clearly interested in whatever confrontation was brewing. Ashley actually put down her phone, sensing entertainment. "Daniel's a good man," I replied carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "We're very happy together." Richard's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Happy? Yes, I'm sure you are. Young women from your background often find happiness in financial security." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to wound without seeming overtly cruel to casual observers. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but kept my expression calm. "I love your son, Mr. Dawson. That's the only reason I'm with him." "Love," he repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. "How wonderfully romantic. Tell me, what exactly do you bring to this relationship besides your obvious affection?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished match. Ashley giggled softly, clearly enjoying my discomfort. Denise pretended to read her magazine while obviously listening to every word. "I bring myself," I said quietly. "My commitment, my partnership, my support for his career and his dreams." Richard's expression suggested he found this answer inadequate. "And what career would that be? What dreams? You work as a clerk at some government office, correct? Filing papers, answering phones?" The dismissal in his tone was unmistakable. He'd reduced my life to the most mundane terms possible, stripping away any dignity or purpose from my work. It was a masterful display of how wealthy people could make others feel small without raising their voice or using profanity. "I work for the Naval Intelligence office," I said, though I knew he wouldn't be impressed by the clarification. "Ah, yes, the military bureaucracy. Very noble, I'm sure." His tone suggested nobility was the last thing he associated with my position. "And this supports Daniel how exactly? Financially? Socially? Professionally?" Each question was a small cut, precise and painful. I'd endured worse treatment from drill sergeants and hostile foreign officials, but there was something particularly cruel about being dissected by the father of the man you loved. "We support each other," I said. "Partnership isn't just about money or status." Ashley snorted delicately. "That's what people without money always say." Richard nodded approvingly at his stepdaughter's comment. "Ashley understands the realities of life. She's building a career in the Marines, stationed at Quantico. Real achievement, real advancement potential." The comparison was obvious and intended to sting. Here was Ashley, young and privileged, being held up as everything I wasn't. The irony was thick, considering I knew details about Ashley's military record that Richard clearly didn't. "The Marines are an excellent career choice," I said diplomatically. "Indeed they are. Ashley's already making quite an impression with her superiors. Natural leadership qualities, they tell me. The kind of woman who commands respect." Ashley preened under the praise, her smile becoming more genuine. "It's all about knowing how to handle authority, how to make the right connections. Some people are just born with it." The jet hit a pocket of turbulence, causing everyone to grip their armrests momentarily. As we steadied, Richard continued his assault on my character and qualifications. "You see, what concerns me about your relationship with my son is the trajectory. Where does it lead? Daniel has opportunities, connections, a future in the family business if he chooses. But that requires a partner who can navigate certain social circles, who can represent the family appropriately." His meaning was crystal clear. I wasn't good enough for his world, wasn't sophisticated enough for his son's future. The attack was more subtle than Ashley's direct insults, but far more devastating. "I understand your concerns," I said, though my voice was beginning to show strain. "But Daniel and I love each other. We're building something together based on mutual respect and shared values." "Shared values," Richard mused. "Such as what? You come from entirely different worlds. He was raised with privilege, education, expectations. You were raised to be grateful for whatever opportunities came your way." The class distinction was drawn with brutal clarity. Rich versus poor, privileged versus grateful, worthy versus unworthy. It was a conversation designed to make me feel like an imposter in my own life. Denise finally looked up from her magazine. "Richard, dear, perhaps we should discuss something more pleasant. The weather is lovely." But Richard was just getting started. "No, I think this conversation is overdue. You see," he said, turning back to me, "I've done my research on you. Small-town background, state school education, entry-level government position. Nothing wrong with any of that, but hardly the foundation for the kind of life my son deserves." The research comment sent a chill through me. How much digging had he done? What exactly did he think he knew about my background? "Daniel knows everything about my background," I said. "He's never had any concerns. Daniel is young and romantic. He sees what he wants to see. But marriage isn't about romance. It's about compatibility, shared goals, mutual advantage. What advantage do you bring to this union?" Ashley leaned forward eagerly. "That's exactly what I told Mom. Some people just aren't cut out for this lifestyle. It's not their fault, they just don't have the breeding for it. The word breeding hung in the air like a slap. I'd been called many things in my life, but never had someone questioned my basic worthiness as a human being with such casual cruelty. "I bring love, loyalty, and commitment," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought those things mattered in a marriage. Richard's laugh was genuinely amused now. "Oh, my dear girl, you really are naive, aren't you? Marriage and families like ours is about much more than feelings. It's about legacy, reputation, social standing. It's about creating something lasting and meaningful." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing our cruising altitude and estimated arrival time. The mundane announcement felt surreal against the backdrop of this character assassination taking place in the cabin. "I've seen this story before," Richard continued, settling back into his seat with the satisfaction of a man delivering a well-rehearsed speech. "Young man from a good family falls for an unsuitable woman. Everyone pretends it will work out because love conquers all. Then reality sets in. The differences become impossible to ignore. The woman realizes she's in over her head. The man realizes he's made a mistake, and everyone suffers." His words painted a picture of inevitable failure, of dreams built on false foundations. It was psychological warfare disguised as paternal concern. "Daniel and I have been together for 2 years," I said. "We've worked through our differences." 2 years, Richard repeated dismissively. "A blink of an eye. Wait until you're invited to your first charity gala, your first country club dinner, your first business function where everything you say and do reflects on the family name. Wait until you realize that everyone is watching, judging, finding you lacking." The vivid picture he painted was designed to terrify me, to make me question whether I really belonged in Daniel's world. It was working. Despite my best efforts to remain composed, doubt was creeping in like water through cracks in a foundation. Ashley sensed my vulnerability and pressed the advantage. "It's really not personal," she said with false sympathy. "Some people just aren't meant for certain lifestyles. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations." The jet continued its smooth flight through cloudless skies, carrying us toward our destination, while Richard Dawson systematically dismantled my sense of worth and belonging. With each passing mile, I felt smaller, more out of place, more convinced that maybe he was right about me. But something deep inside, something forged through years of training and service, refused to break completely. I sat quietly, absorbing the assault, waiting for my moment to respond. Because Richard Dawson had no idea who he was really talking to, and that ignorance would soon become his greatest mistake. The assault continued for another 20 minutes, each comment designed to chip away at whatever confidence I had left. Richard seemed energized by my silence, interpreting it as surrender rather than strategic patience. He'd moved from questioning my worthiness to actively predicting my failure. "You know what I find most telling?" he said, adjusting his gold watch with practiced precision. "Daniel hasn't brought you to a single family business function. Not one board meeting, not one investor dinner, not one charity event. Even he knows you're not ready for that level of scrutiny." Ashley nodded sagely, as if she'd observed this phenomenon herself. It's actually kind of cruel when you think about it. Keeping someone in a relationship they're not equipped for, like watching someone try to swim in water that's way too deep. Denise finally closed her magazine completely. "Perhaps we should focus on the positive aspects of the weekend. The property in the Keys is absolutely stunning this time of year." But Richard waved away his new wife's attempt at diplomacy. "No, this needs to be said. Someone has to be honest with her. Daniel won't be. He's too kind-hearted, too willing to see the best in people even when the evidence suggests otherwise." He leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes fixed on mine with laser intensity. "Let me paint you a picture of your future, my dear. You'll marry my son because you love him and he loves you. For a year, maybe 2, you'll both pretend the differences don't matter. Then the invitations will start coming. Corporate events, social gatherings, charity functions where Daniel needs a wife who can work a room, who can make conversation with senators and CEOs, who can represent the family name with dignity and sophistication. Each word landed like a physical blow. He was describing scenarios I'd never even considered, social situations that felt as foreign as another planet. "You'll stand in corners at these events," he continued relentlessly. "You'll watch other wives networking effortlessly, discussing art and politics and business with the kind of casual expertise that comes from breeding and education. You'll realize that every conversation feels like a minefield, every interaction a chance to embarrass yourself and, by extension, your husband." Ashley giggled softly. "Oh God, can you imagine? It would be like watching someone try to perform surgery with no medical training." "Exactly," Richard said, pleased with the analogy. "And Daniel, sweet boy that he is, will try to protect you. He'll make excuses for why you can't attend certain functions. He'll start going alone to avoid putting you in uncomfortable situations. The distance will grow gradually, naturally, until you're living separate lives under the same roof." The picture he painted was so vivid, so detailed, that I could almost see it happening. Daniel in a tuxedo, apologizing to hosts for my absence. Me at home, watching him drift further into a world I couldn't access. "But here's the truly sad part," Richard said, settling back with the satisfaction of a man delivering a knockout punch. "You'll convince yourself it's temporary. You'll think you can learn, adapt, become someone you're not. You'll spend years trying to transform yourself into something acceptable, and you'll fail because transformation requires more than effort. It requires foundation." The jet hit another patch of turbulence, this one more severe. The plane shuddered and dropped slightly, causing Ashley to gasp and grab her armrest. I didn't flinch. Years of military transport flights had given me a different relationship with turbulence than these civilian passengers. "The final phase," Richard continued once we'd stabilized, "is the most heartbreaking. You'll realize you've become a burden to the man you love. Every social obligation becomes a source of stress for him. Every family gathering becomes an exercise in damage control. Eventually, love isn't enough to overcome the fundamental incompatibility." His voice took on a tone of false compassion. "I'm not trying to be cruel, my dear. I'm trying to save you both years of disappointment and heartbreak. Better to recognize the truth now than to learn it the hard way." Ashley nodded enthusiastically. "It's actually really mature of you to think about it this way, Mr. Dawson. Most people just let these situations play out until everyone gets hurt." "Exactly. I'm offering you a dignified exit before things get complicated. Before there are children involved. Before Daniel's career becomes entangled with your limitations." The word limitations hit like a slap. He'd reduced my entire existence to a series of deficiencies, obstacles that would inevitably destroy my relationship with his son. "I appreciate your concern," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "But Daniel and I will work through whatever challenges we face together." Richard's expression showed genuine surprise at my response. He'd expected capitulation by now, some acknowledgement that his assessment was accurate. "Together," he repeated slowly. "That's admirable sentiment, truly. But some challenges can't be overcome through determination alone. Some gaps are simply too wide to bridge." "Like what?" I asked, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since this conversation began. "Like the gap between your world and ours. Like the difference between surviving and thriving. Like the distinction between being loved and being respected." Ashley leaned forward eagerly. "He's right, you know. I mean, love is great and all, but respect is what really matters in the long run. And respect has to be earned through achievement, through proving you belong." "And what have you achieved?" Richard asked pointedly. "What have you built? What have you accomplished that would make someone like my son proud to introduce you as his wife?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. He wanted me to catalog my achievements, to present my credentials for his approval. The irony was staggering, considering what I'd actually accomplished in my life. "I've served my country," I said simply. "Filing papers and answering phones for the military bureaucracy," he dismissed immediately. "That's service, I suppose, in the technical sense, but hardly the kind of achievement that builds respect or creates opportunities." Ashley nodded sagely. "Military desk jobs are basically government welfare for people who can't hack it in the private sector. I mean, no offense, but that's just reality." The comment revealed so much about Ashley's own military experience that I had to resist the urge to smile. She clearly had no idea what real military service entailed. "The point is," Richard continued, "achievement requires ambition, vision, the ability to create value in the world. Daniel has all of those qualities. He could build an empire if he chose to, but empires require partners who can match that vision, who can contribute meaningfully to the enterprise." "And you don't think I can do that?" I asked. "I think you're a perfectly nice woman who's found herself in a situation beyond her capabilities. There's no shame in that. The shame would be in pretending otherwise and dragging Daniel down with you." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom again, this time announcing our approach to the keys and requesting that everyone return to their seats and fasten seatbelts. The timing felt almost comical given that we were all already seated, and this conversation had effectively strapped me down for the past half hour. "Think about what I've said," Richard concluded as the jet began its descent. "Think about whether you really want to put Daniel through years of social awkwardness and professional embarrassment. Think about whether love alone is worth the cost." As we dropped through the clouds toward the turquoise waters of the Florida Keys, I sat in silence, processing everything Richard had said. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to list my actual accomplishments, to reveal the truth about who I really was. But another part recognized that this moment was about more than just correcting his assumptions. This was about understanding the man Daniel had grown up with, the pressure and expectations that had shaped my fiancé's worldview. This was about seeing the family dynamics I'd be navigating for the rest of my married life. The jet touched down smoothly on a private airstrip surrounded by palm trees and crystal-clear water. Through the windows, I could see a small terminal building and several luxury vehicles waiting to transport us to Richard's estate. As we taxied toward the terminal, Richard stood and straightened his linen jacket. "I hope you'll consider our conversation," he said with the tone of a man who'd delivered important wisdom. "I truly want what's best for everyone involved." Ashley gathered her designer handbag and checked her reflection in her phone camera. "Don't take it personally," she said with manufactured kindness. "It's just business, really. Family business." But as the engines wound down and the cabin door opened to let in the warm Caribbean air, I realized that Richard Dawson had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd spent the entire flight trying to convince me I didn't belong in his world, never suspecting that his world was actually much smaller than mine. The time for silence was almost over. Soon, very soon, Richard would learn that he'd been lecturing someone whose clearance level was higher than he could imagine, whose service record contained achievements he couldn't begin to comprehend, whose quiet demeanor masked capabilities that would redefine everything he thought he knew about worthiness and respect. The moment was coming when Admiral Ghost would step out of the shadows, and Richard, Dawson would discover that he'd been trying to intimidate the wrong woman entirely. The private terminal in the Keys was smaller than the one in Palm Beach, but no less luxurious. Polished marble floors reflected the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the pristine waters beyond. Richard moved through the space like he owned it, which he probably did, nodding to staff members who greeted him with the practiced deference reserved for very important people. "The cars are waiting," Denise announced, checking her phone for what seemed like the 100th time since we'd landed. "I need to call the spa about our appointments tomorrow." Ashley was already posing for selfies against the tropical backdrop, her earlier cruelty temporarily forgotten in favor of social media content. "This light is absolutely perfect," she gushed, angling her phone to capture her best side. I followed the group toward the exit, still processing the verbal assault I'd endured during the flight. Richard's words echoed in my mind like a persistent headache. Every criticism, every prediction of failure, every casual dismissal of my worth had been carefully calculated to break down my confidence. The thing about psychological warfare is that it works best when the target doesn't recognize it for what it is. But I'd been trained to identify manipulation tactics, to see through emotional manipulation and maintain operational clarity even under pressure. What Richard saw as my quiet submission was actually strategic assessment. Outside, 3 black SUVs waited in the humid air, their engines running to keep the interiors cool. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the smell of salt water mixed with tropical flowers created an almost intoxicating atmosphere. It was the kind of setting that should have been relaxing, but tension hung over our group like storm clouds. "You'll ride with Ashley and me," Richard informed me, gesturing toward the lead vehicle. It wasn't a request. "Denise prefers to travel separately when she needs to make business calls." I nodded silently and climbed into the leather interior, noting how Richard positioned himself so he could continue observing me during the drive. Ashley immediately claimed the front passenger seat, leaving me in the back where I could be studied like a specimen. As we pulled away from the terminal, Richard resumed his campaign. "I hope you had time to think during the landing," he said, adjusting the air conditioning with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to perfect comfort. Sometimes a change of scenery helps clarify difficult decisions. The landscape outside was breathtaking. Turquoise water stretched to the horizon, dotted with small islands covered in lush vegetation. Expensive boats bobbed at private docks, and massive homes sat behind gates that probably cost more than most people's entire houses. "This is where Daniel spent his summers growing up," Richard continued, his voice taking on a nostalgic tone. "Learning to sail, meeting the children of other successful families, building the connections that would serve him throughout his life." Ashley turned around in her seat. "Oh, it was amazing. The parties, the yacht races, the formal dinners. Daniel was always so comfortable in that world. Natural grace, like he was born for it." The implication was clear. Daniel belonged here. I didn't. "There's a particular skill to navigating social situations at this level," Richard said, watching me in the rearview mirror. "It's not something you can learn from books or practice in front of a mirror. It's bred into you, passed down through generations of proper upbringing." I remained silent, watching the scenery pass by while mentally cataloging every slight, every assumption, every casual cruelty. The training had taught me patience, the ability to endure discomfort while gathering intelligence. Richard thought he was breaking me down. Actually, he was revealing everything about his own weaknesses and blind spots. "Take tonight's dinner, for example," he continued. "We're expecting several prominent families from Palm Beach and Miami. Business leaders, political figures, people who could significantly impact Daniel's future opportunities. The conversation will range from international economics to art collecting to charitable foundation management." Ashley giggled. "Remember last year when that congressman's wife tried to discuss modern art with someone who clearly had no idea what she was talking about? It was so awkward. Everyone was embarrassed for her." "Exactly," Richard said with satisfaction. "One misstep, one moment of ignorance exposed in front of the wrong people, and reputations can be damaged permanently. Daniel can't afford that kind of liability." The word liability struck like a physical blow. He wasn't just questioning my social skills anymore. He was positioning me as an active threat to his son's future. "I understand you're trying to protect Daniel," I said carefully. "Any father would want the best for his son." "Yes, exactly, and sometimes protection means making difficult choices, having uncomfortable conversations. It means being honest about limitations before they become disasters." We turned through massive iron gates flanked by towering royal palms. The driveway stretched for what seemed like miles, winding through manicured gardens that probably employed a dozen full-time groundskeepers. In the distance, a sprawling mansion emerged like something from a magazine cover. 12 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms, private beach, helicopter landing pad, Richard recited with obvious pride. Daniel will inherit all of this someday, along with the responsibility that comes with it, the weight of maintaining not just property, but legacy. The mansion grew larger as we approached, its white columns and expansive terraces designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Staff members were already emerging to handle luggage and escort guests inside. Everything moved with choreographed precision, a well-rehearsed dance of wealth and service. "This is Daniel's world," Ashley said, gazing up at the imposing structure. "This is what he was raised to manage and preserve. Can you honestly see yourself as the mistress of something like this?" The question hung in the air as we pulled to a stop beneath a covered portico. Uniformed staff members opened our doors simultaneously, their movements synchronized like a military honor guard. "Welcome to Paradise Found," Richard said with a sweep of his arm. 3 generations of the Dawson family have entertained heads of state, captains of industry, and cultural luminaries within these walls. I stepped out into the warm air, craning my neck to take in the full scope of the building. It was undeniably impressive, the kind of place that made ordinary mortals feel small and insignificant, which was, of course, exactly the point. "The guest quarters are in the East Wing," Richard continued, leading us up marble steps that gleamed like mirrors. "You'll have a lovely view of the gardens and the ocean beyond. I trust you'll find the accommodations adequate." Inside, the mansion was even more overwhelming. Cathedral ceilings soared overhead, decorated with intricate molding that probably took master craftsmen months to complete. Original artwork covered the walls, pieces I recognized from art history courses but had never expected to see in someone's home. "The Monet is my personal favorite," Richard said, noticing my gaze lingering on a water lily painting. "Acquired at auction 3 years ago. Cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, but true beauty is priceless." Ashley nodded enthusiastically. "Art appreciation is so important in our circles. People judge you by your cultural sophistication, your ability to discuss artists and movements with authority." "Indeed," Richard agreed. "Dinner conversation tonight will likely touch on the upcoming exhibitions in New York and Miami, the kind of insider knowledge that separates true connoisseurs from casual observers." We walked through room after room, each more elaborate than the last. A library with leather-bound volumes that probably hadn't been opened in decades. A formal dining room with a table that could seat 30. A ballroom with crystal chandeliers that cast rainbows across polished floors. "Daniel proposed to his first serious girlfriend in that ballroom," Ashley mentioned casually. "Beautiful ceremony. She was perfect for him, really. Wellesley graduate, family in banking, spoke 3 languages fluently." Richard's expression darkened slightly. "That relationship ended badly. She couldn't handle the pressure of public scrutiny when Daniel decided to pursue firefighting instead of business. Sometimes love isn't enough to overcome fundamental incompatibilities." The message was unmistakable. Another woman had failed to meet the family standards. Another relationship had crumbled under the weight of expectations. I was being warned that the same fate awaited me. A uniformed woman appeared as if summoned by invisible signals. "Mr. Dawson, your guests are beginning to arrive. The first cocktails are being served on the terrace." "Excellent," Richard said, straightening his jacket. "Time to begin the evening's entertainment. Ashley, you'll want to change into something appropriate for dinner. We have several young gentlemen joining us tonight who would appreciate meeting you." Ashley beamed at the prospect of being paraded before eligible bachelors. "I brought the perfect dress. Vera Wang, very sophisticated." "And you," Richard said, turning his attention to me with renewed focus, "might want to observe this evening rather than participate actively. Watch how conversations flow, how connections are made, how business gets conducted in social settings. Consider it educational." The condescension was breathtaking, He was relegating me to the role of silent observer at a dinner in my honor, treating me like a child who needed to watch adults interact before being allowed to speak. "I'm sure I'll learn a great deal," I said quietly, my voice betraying nothing of the storm building inside me. As we were escorted to our respective rooms, Richard delivered one final blow. "Oh, and my dear, please don't feel obligated to contribute to conversations about topics beyond your experience. Sometimes the most elegant response is simply to listen and smile." My suite was admittedly spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a private balcony overlooking the ocean. The furnishings were museum-quality antiques, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases throughout the sitting area. It was the kind of luxury I'd never experienced, designed to make guests feel both pampered and insignificant. I stood on the balcony, watching waves roll gently toward the private beach, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of Richard's systematic humiliation. For hours, he'd chipped away at my confidence, my sense of worth, my belief in my own capabilities. He'd painted a picture of inevitable failure so vivid that part of me was beginning to believe it. But as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, something shifted inside me. The quiet voice that had sustained me through years of military service, through classified operations and dangerous situations, began to speak again. Richard Dawson had spent the day trying to convince me I didn't belong in his world. He'd used every weapon in his considerable arsenal of wealth, status, and social intimidation. He'd recruited his stepdaughter as an accomplice and positioned himself as the wise patriarch protecting his family from an unsuitable intruder. What he didn't understand was that his world, impressive as it might be, was actually quite small compared to mine. His influence extended to business deals and social circles. Mine had extended to matters of national security and international intelligence. As I prepared to dress for dinner, I made a decision. Not to reveal everything immediately, but to stop accepting his assessment of my worth. The time was coming when Richard Dawson would learn that he'd been trying to intimidate someone whose clearance level exceeded his wildest imagination. The evening was about to take a very different turn than he expected. The dinner gong echoed through the mansion at precisely 7 o'clock, its deep bronze tone reverberating off marble walls and crystal fixtures. I had chosen a simple black dress from my limited wardrobe, nothing that would draw attention or give Richard additional ammunition for his ongoing campaign to prove my inadequacy. The mirror in my suite reflected a woman who looked composed, even elegant, but inside I felt like I was preparing for battle. The main terrace had been transformed into an outdoor dining paradise. Strings of lights created a canopy of stars overhead, while torches flickered along the perimeter, casting dancing shadows across perfectly manicured gardens. Round tables draped in crisp white linen accommodated groups of 8, with centerpieces of exotic orchids that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budgets. Richard stood at the center of it all, resplendent in a white dinner jacket that made him look like he'd stepped out of a 1940s Hollywood film. He moved from group to group with the practiced ease of a man born to host, his laugh carrying across the terrace as he greeted guests with the kind of familiarity that spoke of decades of shared privilege. Ashley had indeed chosen perfectly for the evening. Her emerald green gown clung to her figure like it had been painted on, and she wore diamonds that caught the light with every gesture. She was already surrounded by young men in expensive suits, their attention focused on her with the intensity of moths drawn to flame. "Ah, there she is," Richard announced as I approached, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw nearby attention. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my son's fiancée. She works for the government in some capacity." The introduction was masterfully dismissive. He'd managed to acknowledge my presence while simultaneously diminishing my importance and reducing my career to some capacity. Several guests nodded politely, their smiles the kind reserved for people they'd forget within minutes. "How wonderful," said a woman whose jewelry probably had its own insurance policy. "What department?" "Naval Intelligence," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. "Oh, like clerical work?" asked a man with silver hair and a Harvard class ring. My nephew did something similar after college, very stable employment. Richard's smile was almost predatory. Exactly, very practical career choice, steady paycheck, good benefits, the kind of security that appeals to certain backgrounds. I felt the familiar weight of his condescension, but something had shifted during my time alone in the suite. The voice inside me, the one forged through years of classified operations and high-stakes decisions, was growing stronger with each dismissive comment. Dinner was announced, and we moved to assigned seating that had clearly been orchestrated by Richard. I found myself at a table with several couples whose conversation immediately revealed their membership in that rarefied world of inherited wealth and social prominence. They discussed vacation homes in Aspen and St. Moritz, art acquisitions and charity galas, business deals involving sums of money that seemed almost fictional. "The foundation is hosting a fundraiser next month," mentioned a woman whose pearls probably had their own security detail. "We're hoping to raise $2 million for pediatric cancer research. Of course, it's the kind of event that requires careful guest curation. The wrong crowd can really diminish the atmosphere." Ashley leaned forward eagerly. "Oh, I'd love to help with that. I have so many connections through my military service at Quantico. Important people, you know, decision makers." The irony was staggering. Ashley was positioning herself as someone with significant military connections, while sitting across from someone whose actual clearance level would have stunned everyone at the table into silence. "How exciting that you're both military women," said another guest, looking between Ashley and me. "You must have so much in common." "Well," Ashley said with a laugh that carried just a hint of superiority, "I think our experiences are quite different. I'm stationed at headquarters level, working with senior leadership on strategic initiatives, very high-level stuff." Richard beamed with pride. "Ashley's already making quite an impression with her superiors. Natural leadership qualities, they tell me." I took a sip of wine, watching Ashley bask in praise for accomplishments I knew were largely fictional. Her military record had crossed my desk just weeks earlier, and the reality was far different from the picture she was painting. "And what about you, dear?" asked the woman with the pearls, turning her attention to me with polite interest. "What exactly do you do in Naval Intelligence?" Sometimes the most powerful moments in life happen when someone underestimates exactly who you are. Richard thought he was dealing with a government clerk who didn't deserve his son. Instead, he discovered he'd been insulting someone whose service record would redefine everything he believed about worth and respect. The truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, reminding us that quiet strength often carries more weight than loud arrogance. Never judge someone by the chapter of their story you happen to see, because some people carry secrets that would humble the proudest hearts.